Y'all ever hear the story of the little slave girl that was bought as a concubine and was tired of her master essaying her, so she killed his ass? Get your popcorn. This story takes place in Calloway County, Missouri in 1855. A man by the name of Robert Newsom bought a slave by the name of Celia. Robert purchased Celia a year after his wife passed away to do the cooking and cleaning of his plantation. But that's not the only reason why he bought Celia. He owned 5 other slaves, which were all men, but he wanted little Celia to be his concubine. So this middle-aged man made the journey to go find a woman slave and brought her back. As soon as he reached home, the carriage wasn't even unpacked yet, he essayed her. And this began a long 5.5-year journey of him essaying Celia. She did cook and clean his plantation, his house, and served his grown children, but she was seen as a sexual object to Robert. Like I said, he lived with his adult children. Her cabin was only 50 feet from the home, so everybody knew, as quiet as kept, what he was sneaking out every single night and doing to Celia. They all act like it wasn't happening, but it absolutely was. 2 years after she arrived at the plantation, she became pregnant and gave birth to a mulatto child that belonged to Robert. Then 2 years after that, she was forced to give birth to another one of his kids. But what nobody expected is after her second child, she actually fell in love with one of Robert's other slaves named George. And by all accounts, they had a consensual relationship. They were in love. But even though she was in a relationship with George, she still was being essayed by Robert. After 5 years of all of this, George and Celia had enough. So George gave her an ultimatum. Either you tell him to stop this shit or we're done. I can't do this no more. Fearing losing George, she went to Robert and told him, I'm not doing this no more, which was actually really brave for that time. But Robert was like, yeah, whatever. I'll see you in your cabin tonight. And at that moment, he fucked around and he was about to find out. And I forgot to mention, at this point, she was pregnant with her 3rd child. And she didn't know if it was George's or if it was Robert's. So after she already had asked nicely, she went out to the woods, picked up the biggest branch stick that she could muster, because remember, she's pregnant, and put it in the corner of her cabin and waited. It must be added that she had very, very bad morning sickness and had already begged Robert to leave her the fuck alone. It's not like this was just like the first time she had asked him to stop. She had asked him several times to lay off her. So that night, Robert wobbled his 60-year-old ass into her cabin like he did every night. And Celia grabbed the stick that she had collected earlier in the day to ward him off and told him, like, don't come no closer. All right? And this heartless old bastard was doing this in front of her kids. Like, they lived in a little cabin, so he was S.A.ing her in front of her kids. When he didn't back up, she whacked his ass over the head. And to make sure he ain't get back up, she continuously bludgeoned him. And she said, and I quote, the devil got into me. That wasn't the devil, them was the ancestors getting their reparations. She beat his skull in. Once she knew he was good and dead, she rolled his ass into the fire and tended to it all night. She barbecued his ass to ash and bones. Ashe. The larger bones that were not disintegrated by the fire, she crushed them, and then she put them in the floorboards, like pushed them through the floorboards of her cabin. So after a long sleepless night of doing the good Lord's work, she went to sleep. She got up right before noon and started spying on the family because, of course, they're looking for Robert. But then she noticed that the ash in her fireplace was far too much. It would have looked suspicious. It looked weird. So she commissioned Robert's 12-year-old grandson, Coffee, who also lived on the plantation with them, to dispose of his grandfather unknowingly. Sis was low-key a savage. So she told Coffee, I'll give you 24 walnuts if you clean out my fireplace and get rid of the ashes. And he was super excited because apparently he loved walnuts. So he gathered his grandfather's ashes and scattered them down the pathway all the way to a stable that was on the property. So after Robert was missing for 12 hours, his grown kids was like, we're going to go talk to Celia. The same person that they didn't even think anything was going on between them two. Why would you go to her cabin first if you knew that nothing was going on? After basically interviewing her for hours, she finally caved in and told them what she had done. She was arrested, but what makes this case very, very interesting is that they didn't immediately hang her. Back then, even in this old time in the state of Missouri, a woman had a God-given right to kill a man that essayed her. But because she was an enslaved woman, that didn't apply to her. But her defense did go back and forth for months over this, giving out all of the counties and state laws to try to get Cecilia off. During this time, somewhere between October and December, she had given birth and it was a stillborn. She was so stressed out during this whole trial period that she lost her baby. The judge acknowledged that this was a law and that technically she should be protected under it, but because she was 1/4 a human, he wouldn't hear of it. So on December 21st, 1855, 19-year-old Celia was walked to the gallows and hung. Her 2 biracial daughters were sold to Harry Newsom, which was Robert Newsom's son. So he basically bought his sisters. This story had no real spiritual reparations because there's not much else on the internet about her, but she got her reparations up front. And I'm pretty sure she'd do it again. Do good and be good.